evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, coming to you with another exciting episode of the BGC Book Club. So I invite you all to come on in the room, get comfortable, get something good to drink. You might want to have a snack too, because we're going to be talking about food, and you are bound to get hungry as we go through this conversation on this evening. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. So if you're here and you don't mind dropping us a note to let us know where you're joining us from, that would be wonderful, because it's always good to see who is in the room. So on this evening, I am very excited to talk to someone whose actually career I've been following for a while. I didn't get a chance to tell her that, but I have some of the poetry books. I remember watching Hulu's Soul Food documentary a year or so ago and seeing her there and thinking, oh, wow, I love the story that she has to tell about her home state and the way that she loves food and cooking and how it's a part of her heritage and culture. So in case you didn't see the beginning, our special guest for this evening is Crystal Wilkinson, who is a recent fellowship recipient of the Academy of American Poets, is the award-winning author of Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost, this beautiful book that we'll be discussing this evening, which is a culinary memoir, Perfect Black, a collection of poems, and 3 works of fiction, The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, and Blackberries. She is a recipient of an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, an O. Henry Prize, a USA Artist Fellowship, and an Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. Her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including most recently in The Atlantic, The Kenyon Review, Story, Agni, Literary Journal, Emergence, Oxford American, and Southern Cultures. The Poet Laureate of Kentucky from 2021 to 2023, Crystal currently teaches creative writing at the University of Kentucky, where she is a Bush Holbrook Endowed Professor. So that's a lot. That's a mouthful right there. But real quick, before I bring her up, I do want to show you this beautiful synopsis of her book in video. So hold on just one second. And here we go. Yes, that all looks good to me. I'm sure it looks good to you too. So here she is, the woman of the hour, Crystal Wilkinson. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yes, it is indeed an honor, a pleasure to be able to meet you after following, as I say, your career for such a long time. So I do consider it an honor. And congratulations on your new book as well. So how does it feel to have this memoir out in the world?
Well, it feels great. I didn't think that I would feel so vulnerable. It's about food, but I didn't think that I would feel so vulnerable having written fiction and poetry and sort of unlayering the story the way that I do. It was a very emotional book to write, and it's been an emotional long tour this month. I have one more tour date tomorrow, and then the tour will be over. But I didn't realize it would be so emotional and that it would evoke such emotion in other people.
And I definitely can say that because it is a food memoir. And so even though you're talking about food, you're talking about your family, your history, all of the wonderful women and men that play a role in your upbringing. And so that's what makes it so special. And I can definitely understand the emotion because, as I mentioned before we came on, there's one particular recipe in here for chicken and dumplings, which is something that I love. And I know my mom always watches, and she will remember when I was a little girl, my grandmother, her mother, would always make me chicken and dumplings whenever we were coming to town to visit. So I definitely can see that. So for anyone who may not have had an opportunity to pick up a copy of the book yet, what is Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts about?
Well, it's a culinary memoir, and it sort of walks through my family and my heritage, going all the way back to my fourth great grandmother, who was born in 1795 in Virginia, brought to Kentucky as an enslaved child in the early 1800s. And then it travels all the way through to my grandmother, who I was raised by, to me, and then to my children. So it's an intergenerational book that sort of travels and speaks specifically to my heritage, but it also speaks to all of our heritage. I believe that my fourth great grandmother, Aggie, is sort of a stand-in for all the hundreds of thousands of Black women across the country who may be unnamed. Like, I was lucky enough to do the research and to find her and be able to name her. But we know that through enslavement, there's lots of women that were unnamed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is a blessing to have a name, to know where your heritage and where your people come from, and to, just really have a stronger sense of who you are in that
Mm-hmm.
process. And so it also talks about Appalachia, which a lot of people don't think about Black people in Appalachia.
Right. I think that's, I see this book in conversation with other books that sort of work against stereotypes, right? So that's one thing that people often say is like, oh, you from Kentucky? There are Black people in Kentucky? And I'm like, yeah, Gail Jones among them, and some of our other famous Kentuckians, but also that there are Black people who have lived in Appalachia for hundreds of years. My family can be traced back 200 years of living in the same place. And so people often ask, that they think of Appalachia as being a white word even. And it's like, why would you even claim that? Why not just say country or say something else? And my whole thing is that my family's been there for over 200 years. It's as much ours as it is anyone else's. Even though if you look in an older dictionary, it will say, if you go pick up one, a dictionary written in the 60s or 70s, and you look under the word Appalachia, it will say white people indigenous to the Appalachian region. So that's a part of history. We've been erased from the history. So I think that in addition to telling my own family story, that this book is part of a conversation that says, yes, there are Black people in Appalachia.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that you say that, because Kentucky, but my father was born and raised right in the Ohio Valley.
Uh-huh.
West Virginia, all up in that area. So not too long ago, I was with one of my uncles, and he was saying, I didn't realize that it was, Appalachia. I didn't realize that that's where I grew up until later on, because they never thought that way. It was just where they grew up.
Yeah, the same. I think if I had asked my grandparents about that, they wouldn't have heard that word. They wouldn't know what Appalachia was. So yeah, a lot of us grew up in those areas and those regions and didn't know that word, but have a home place that we can identify with.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I find interesting, just in your family story and even on a larger historical context of the area, is that yes, there would have been people who were enslaved there, but it's different from perhaps what enslavement would have been in places like Georgia, where I currently reside, or the other places that we think of. What was so different about enslavement in that region of the country versus other parts of the United States?
Well, I think because of the terrain and because of the work, it wasn't the sort of larger plantations like you would find in the deeper South, like you find in Georgia and South Carolina, in Alabama, and some of the other places. where there was larger plantations and the larger industries like the sugar plantations and things like that. So in these small towns, there was slavery, but it was more of people working along with the enslaver. For example, my fourth great grandmother, Aggie, was in sort of a common law marriage with her. We know that he owned her, but it was sort of he never married a white woman, but he had her there. They were listed on the census as being husband and wife, and he never took a white wife. So she worked the land beside him. She was, we believe, enslaved, but she did work beside him, as did a lot of people who were enslaved during that time in that region. They served with innkeepers or worked in fields or sometimes worked in the coal mines or worked on small farms rather than the larger plantations. And we don't always think about all the nuances and the intricacies of the different kinds of enslavement that our people went through. But it's not all like you see on the films
Right.
of just a big sugar plantation or a big cotton plantation. There were nuances to that work and that labor in other places.
And that was a lesson for me, because I never thought about it, because a lot of times we think the higher north you go, you may not even see it at all, but to realize, yes, it still existed, but it looked differently from what we might be accustomed to. So, we have a visitor, Rhonda McKnight, author, saying hello. Welcome, Rhonda.
Hi.
Glad to have you here. But yes, and your family history is so rich, even knowing of Aggie, who we've already talked about, but other family members as well, like your cover girl, so to speak.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about her, about Patsy.
Yeah, that is Patsy Rife. And, the area that I grew up in is probably 98.95% white.
Wow.
And it was that way when I grew up. Me and my two cousins were the only Black kids from like kindergarten all the way up through high school. But I kind of grew up with the legacy of Patsy Rife. There was always a Patsy Rife Ridge. And I didn't really know who she was. But we knew that there was a Patsy Rife Ridge. And every time somebody said Patsy Rife Ridge, my grandmother would say, "Oh, she's somewhere kin to us." And I think, okay, well, she's somewhere kin to us. And then later on, I found out that she was Black. And if you look in the history books for that county, there's always that photograph that's on the cover of the book. There's always that photograph of her. And so the paragraph beneath her, you have these pages and pages of white history. And then somewhere in the back, there would be a paragraph that says something like, Patsy Rife was a colored businesswoman. She was the daughter of a wealthy white businessman and a slave. And so to my surprise, when I did the research, there was my fourth great grandmother, Aggie, and my fourth great grandfather, Tarleton. They were her parents.
Wow.
So that's the kind of erasure that I try to bring to life in the book, because in all those documentations, she's just the daughter of a slave woman and this wealthy white businessman. And that's all you ever know about her. And, it talks about her and her husband, who she owned, plowing the area and, getting rid of the hardships of the landscape there on Patsy Rife Ridge to build a hunting lodge and to have business and to plant orchards. And that's what we knew about who she was, but we didn't know that Aggie and Tarleton were her parents until I began to do this research and genealogical research, but also some historical archival research in my hometown. And I
Mm.
think that's the first place that this plateau of emotion came, because um, there's something just washed over me when I was able to actually put my finger on, um, in the history books, or in the what do you call them, the deed books. There's a
Mhm.
large red velvet, encased in red velvet, the actual books from the 1800s, and so I was able to go to the courthouse, and I picked it up and heaved it and put it on the table, and then to open it up, and it actually says, from Tarleton Wilkinson to Aggie of Color, where he deeded her like a feather bedstead, pots and pans,
Mm.
spoons and forks, all kitchen items. But the ink was still there. And so touching that ink was really
Mm.
an emotional experience for me, because I felt like I was putting my finger directly on history. Like, they didn't write that, of course. It was some clerk in the courthouse that wrote that down, but just for
Still.
it to be there, and to be that ink, was just so powerful to me, that I felt as if I was touching history. And that's what really motivated me to try to bring the history to life.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that, because I can only imagine, how that would feel, to be able to see that and put your hands right on those documents. And what Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts, of course, you are honoring those women like Patsy, like Aggie, and other family members, your grandmother who raised you, your mother,
Mhm.
by telling their stories and how you learned to cook, the food ways, and all of that sort of thing. Because we know, every culture has their own different food ways and things of that nature, but they really do play a factor in how, what we're eating when we grow up,
Yeah.
what we're eating on holidays. You talk about things like birthdays and other celebrations, which we can get into that in a minute. But that's a very important part of us. And the fact that, these things have been passed down to you for years
Mhm.
and years.
Yeah, I always laugh about it, because the quickest way to start a fight on social media is to say something about food, right? So
Mhm.
I often, about every 6 months, I like to start a good food fight, and all you have to say is something like, I woke up this morning and I put sugar in my grits. And you can hear through the screen, you hear you hear people gasping like, "Oh my gosh, why would you ruin grits that way?"
Yes.
But I think that because of our kitchen ghosts, and the ways that food was prepared in our households, is what makes us so fierce in those fights. Like, no, don't put the sugar in the cornbread. You're not supposed to do that, and all those different things. But we know that from each region that we come from
Mm-hmm.
has its nuances. People often compare, the Deep South. When people think of Kentucky foods and Appalachian foods as the same as the Deep South. Well, part of the reason why they're not is because of the land itself. In the Deep South, you could have a winter. See, I see some Rhonda saying, "Why ruin grits like that?"
And I had some grits the other day with sugar in them. So na 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 na.
See, that's that Appalachian heritage you got.
Yep.
When people in the Deep South wouldn't think of that, like, oh gosh, it's supposed to be savory. You're supposed to put a little butter, a little salt, and get it that way. But I think the terrain was part of the reason. Like, the Appalachian culture depends on preservation.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of preserving the foods, because you can't grow food in the summer in Appalachia at all. Like, in the Deep South, you can have a winter crop. You can grow collards, can take some tough weather, but in Appalachia you can't. So the idea is on preservation. Like, how do we keep this? So you cure the meats so that you can have ham, and you can have sausage, and you can have strickling, as my grandfather would call it, like a little piece of meat that you can put in some beans or something, You do things like leather breeches, where you would string up green beans and let them dry out, and then you rehydrate them, and you have green beans in the winter, or you can, or you freeze. But it's all about like, we've got food now this
Right.
summer in the garden, but what we're going to have come winter. And when I was a little girl, one of my jobs was to take the potatoes
Hmm.
and put them in the attic. And you had to put them far enough from each other not to touch so they wouldn't rot. And things like that. Like, you can grow potatoes in the winter in the deep south, but not where I'm from. So you got that rough terrain that you've got to deal with. So the emphasis is on preservation, preserving everything.
Yes, yes, that's so good. And real quickly, well, we saw the comments here about ruining grits and all that kind of stuff, but just real quickly, everybody, as I mentioned, there is a giveaway. So if you would like to have an opportunity to win a copy, actually, I'm giving away 3 over the next few minutes, between now and the time we finish, 3 copies of the book. So in order, one of my sorors is here like, oh no, soror, not the sugar and the cream. Ma'am, I did, and I'm still your soror. But if you would like to have an opportunity to win a copy of the book, you can just leave a comment or just put praise song as it is currently spelled there, hashtag praise song, and we will start some of the giveaways here momentarily. So hashtag praise song in the comments, and we will start choosing some names here in the next few minutes. So I'm gonna leave that up just so you know. Praise song, just like it is in the name of the book. So, as we were just talking about, the difference in the land and all of that, one of the things that I also found very interesting about your family story is just the fact that it had to live off of the land. The land
Mhm.
thing, and farming and having your animals and, different things like that, foraging, all these different things. So, growing up as a farm girl, how did you like that, or did you not like it? Or of course you didn't have a choice in many instances, but what did that mean for you in terms of your relationship with food, even as it stands?
Mhm. I mean, I think I have an appreciation for where food comes from, but I was I can do it now, but I was a spoiled little girl. I was being grandparent raised, and I was spoiled rotten. If my cousins are watching this, they going, um, so I didn't have a long list of chores or anything like that, but I could do farm work. I just didn't have to do farm work the way
Okay.
that my mother and them had done it. Um, but I think being able to roam the land is really what made me become a writer. Like, I
Okay.
could go and sit by the creek and read, and then reading turned into writing. So having all that freedom, I think, was a big part of it. And
Mm,
then the other part, like the one chore I could do and that I wanted to do, was to cook. I can
okay.
remember being 4 years old, or even younger, and standing up in a chair and fixing my little head to look in the pots. I wanted to see in the
Mhm.
bottom of the pot to see what Granny was cooking, and how she was cooking it. So I started cooking really young, even though I wasn't out milking the cows. I would go out and gather vegetables, if she needed something for dinner.
Mhm.
I would go out and get water from the well. And there was a generation removed too, because my mother didn't raise me. My grandparents did. So in some ways, I guess I grew up sort of old fashioned, uh, a generation removed from my
Mhm.
own generation. Because I can
Right.
remember when my kids were little, um, and some of my children's parents and mothers were cooking faster food, and they were like, well, what are you having for supper? And my kids were always like, chicken and dumplings. We got cornbread. And they're like, but it's Tuesday.
Right.
You having all that tonight? And so I cooked just like my grandmother did. So
Mm.
that fullness of cooking as many meals as I could during a day, I got that from my grandmother.
Oh my goodness, it sounds like my mother, all the other children had to do the work because she was the baby. She was also light-skinned, so they thought she would burn. My
Spoiled
wow.
girls.
That is something. That is something. But real quick, I want to go ahead and do our first giveaway because we've got about 30 minutes left, and I want to go ahead and start catch the first person. So y'all bear with me for just a second. Got to do a quick little thingamabob here, and we will get this going. All right. Going to share this screen. All right, and I'm going to draw the first name. Let's see. Tashika B, congratulations. You are the first winner this evening. So I'm going to jot that down. Please, Tashika, please I'm gonna put an email address in the chat, and you can please send me an email, and I'll make sure that you get your copy of the book. So congratulations, Tashika. You can email me at editor@browngirlcollective.com. So congratulations, you are going to love this book.
Congratulations.
So, yes. So let's start to get into some of the recipes because there are just so many that you have in the book. So it is kind of broken down by like different relationships or holidays, or you have certain relationships with certain types of food. So how was it that you decided which things to include and which things to maybe not include in the recipes that you share in the book?
Well, what came first was the narrative. Came first was the stories. And so I wrote the stories and then decided what recipes would go, So of course, the things that go with the holiday meal. So that's where the corn pudding came in. Jam cake is cooked once a year in my family. Like it's cooked for Christmas. That's when my grandmother would make the jam cake and sometimes make the jam that goes with the jam cake. So it was a ritual. And so that I knew was going to be with the holidays. There are some things in the book that are not generally thought of as being Appalachian foods, but they went with my family story, and the food travels in the book too. So I talk about some of those old fashioned recipes, but I also owned a cafe within a bookstore that I owned with my husband for about 8 years. And so some of the recipes that are in there are from that store. Like my grandmother certainly did not make a sorghum latte.
Okay. Right.
So, yeah. And some of the other ones are like chicken salad with a kick. Some of those are more contemporary recipes. And I wanted them to sort of travel from the old times up to the contemporary, because I think that food provides a living history, right? And it's always, we're always innovating. There are some things that are not like when I grew up because thank you, Karen, I was a vegetarian for about 20 years.
Yes, you talk about that.
Yeah.
And your unique relationship with eggs. I love that. That was a good story about, you can share a little bit about that story, like why you don't like eggs.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter about the egg. I mean, I appreciate the eggs and the history of the eggs and how, during enslavement, Black women and children were the ones that gathered the eggs. And my grandmother raised chickens, and a lot of people in our family raised chickens. But I'll say I won't do a spoiler alert.
Yeah,
Exactly why.
just a little bit.
Exactly why I don't like eggs. But I had an incident that happened when I was a child that made me, to this day, not like eggs. Like I don't put an egg. That's the worst thing. Like I will leave a restaurant if I find an egg hiding on my hamburger, or in my sandwich. Or I went to a fancy restaurant a few weeks ago while I was on book tour and I was going to treat myself. And they brought the grits out and it had a cured egg on top of it. I just,
Oh,
but as a baker, I know that, there
yeah.
are a lot of the cakes that I have. Corn pudding has to have eggs. There are a lot
Mm,
of the cakes that I make that have to have eggs in it. So I appreciate the egg. Just don't put that on my plate.
okay. Well, that begs the question, though. So is it just the egg in its raw form, for lack of a better way of putting it? So, like, if you bake a cake or something and the eggs are in it, you'll eat that. You just
Yeah.
don't want just regular eggs.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not allergic, although I use that excuse a lot. My husband always says, why do you keep lying and telling people that you are allergic to eggs? I said, well, rather than explain the whole story, like I have
Right.
an aversion for eggs. I
Yes.
just don't want eggs on my plate
Right. Right.
or
Yes.
on
And
my
yes.
sandwich or in my
Yes.
salad.
Yes, and the story is in the book. Yes, it is. So you have to
Yeah.
get the book, either buy one or win one tonight, and then you will find out what that story is. But I just love that because a lot of times Rhonda's like, it's easier to say you're allergic. Yeah, it is.
It is.
But like, I'm just allergic. But one of the things that really rang out to me, and it's come up other times in some of the other books and stories that we shared in this space, is just the whole thing of our history, whether it's things that are written down or whether it's things that are, oral history. It's just so important, whether it is recipes, or family stories, or all of these sorts of things, because at a certain point when people start to transition, you lose those things and you
Mhm.
can't go back and get them. So I love the fact that like you have a recipe book. I mean, a recipe box where you hold things.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a recipe box that's, rusted now, and there's a photograph of it in the book. And I've had it since I was a freshman in high school, um, and when I took the first home ec class, and it became a project. I think we had to have a recipe box for the home ec class, and then of course it had the categories, and then we were supposed to fill them up. And I sort of knew that if I said, Granny, can I have your recipe for this, that, or the other, she would probably say no, or, go on somewhere, I'm doing something. And so I would ask her, well, how do you make such and such? And
Mm-hmm.
she'd say, well, you're going to use this bowl, get you a little bit of flour, go reach over there and get you some lard. You're going to put that lard in. And then, so she told me how to make these things. And then I would write them down the way that she told me. And so, one of the things that I've figured out when I was writing this book is how much the oral tradition plays
Mm-hmm.
in what we cook. And even in cooking, we use the oral tradition because somebody is going to tell us, now you're going to reach in there and you're going to get a pinch, or you're going to, pour you a little bit. And they don't say how much. So it's like,
Right.
if it's too wet, put some more flour in it. If it's too dry, pour you a little bit of milk in it or a little bit of water. And so um, those precise measurements are not there, but the voice is there. I
Mm-hmm.
think of recipes as poems because of the orality of them, the
Yeah.
way that my grandmother told the story, the way that I would write the story down. And it was as if she was telling me a story about biscuits, not just the recipe for biscuits. And so I have gathered all those. Some of them are in her handwriting. Some
Mm.
of them are in my chicken scratch from high school. And many of them don't have directions. They just have the ingredients.
Oh wow. Oh
Uh,
wow.
some of them have directions and not complete ingredients.
Ooh.
And so
Wow.
that proved to be a problem. Like when I was putting the book together, there's that ended up being someone's job. Like when you
Okay.
write a cookbook like this, well, mine's a culinary memoir with recipes, but my editor wanted to make sure that each thing was cookable. So
Right.
sometimes I might list it the way that my grandmother did, and then there was a recipe tester who tested it. And sometimes she would call me or email me, and she'd say, well, Crystal, trying to make this cake, and does it really need to be 3 hours? Or it would be something like that. And I'd go, oh yeah, that was in the 70s and Granny's oven wasn't working
Right.
when she gave me
Right.
that recipe. Or there'd be some story like that
Mhm.
that would come up. And so that part of it was important because I did want them to be cookable. But
Right.
as we know in our families, I saw a video earlier where somebody was doing a praise song because they finally,
Oh yeah, I
I
saw.
can't remember what they did. You see it? I can't
I
remember
saw
what
it was on IG. I can't remember what it was either, but she was like, "Yeah, she finally got
yeah.
it."
Yeah, she was like, I finally made something using the mama's directions was something like uh stir until God says it's right or something like that. It wasn't like a precise measurement. She was like, I finally did it. It finally
Right,
tastes like hers. So
right,
I
and
think a
that's
lot of it is by trial and error like that because our ancestors, sometimes people hid recipes too,
mm,
or there's a variety of recipes. Like I still get
right.
tickled because
Yeah, that in the
people talk
book.
about like my grandmother's jam cake. She had actually published a recipe that was her jam cake in like a church um, recipe book, a church cookbook. But she had 4 different recipes.
Right.
And there was a lady that she worked for that when I started writing this book said, "Do you want me to send you? I've got Christine's recipe. You want me to send it?" And I said, "Sure." And she sent it, and I just kind of chuckled to myself at some of the omissions. And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I hope that she was able to make this." She had it all these years, and it was in my grandmother's
Oh,
handwriting,
wow.
but it was not
The right
the
recipe.
recipe that we used.
And
It
that
was
makes sense
another.
to keep people from stealing your stuff and trying to do what you do. But we have several comments because people are loving this conversation.
Oh,
So
good.
yes, Karen says, my grandmother told me if I'm going to change her recipes to make it vegan friendly, don't. I don't mess the stuff up. Pamela is saying, in hindsight, I should have taken home economics. I had to watch my grandma for years, just peeking in the kitchen until I was allowed in her kitchen. Yeah, and I took home ec, but I can't really say that my cooking skills came from home ec. It just came from over the years and trial and error. And I do love a good cookbook. So, Rhonda saying, I understand some people really need recipes, but I learned to feel the food and trust myself. Pamela says that as well. Yes, feel and taste plus aroma sometimes.
Yes.
And then again, Rhonda saying, I need recipes for cake, but not pies or cobblers so much. Okay.
Yeah. Someone said that about my book, that it was a guide, that there's a recipe there, but it's sort of a guide. Like if you want more sugar in the cobbler, do it. If you want more fruit, do it. Because, that's our heritage to be intuitive cooks,
Mm-hmm.
vibrational cooks.
Right, right. And that's good. And I have a family member, I'm not going to say who it is, but I have a family member always telling, please follow the recipe until you figure it out. Don't start messing with the recipe until you perfected the recipe, because there is art and a science to it,
Mm-hmm.
to putting things together where, sometimes you can't, make substitutions or whatever, because it'll throw the whole chemistry off, So yeah. So that is so true. It's like vibrational cooks. Yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
vibration. Now, in the book, you do, because it is historical to your family as well as things that many of us have experienced or our ancestors may have experienced. I was really intrigued by the chapter where you talk about Black folks and birthdays and not really thinking about the fact that having a birthday is something that some of our ancestors or our foreparents may not have ever had the experience of actually having a birthday.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of his history shows that was another way of degrading us, right? If you're thought of as being less than human, then you don't need to know when you were born and under what circumstances. That was another way of sort of keeping us down by not allowing us to know when we were born. That's one of the things that Frederick Douglass talks about, that he didn't know. You would say things like born during a certain season or during new crop season or in the springtime, you would know markers like that, but you would not know. And so he gave himself a birthday of February 14th, and celebrated that way. There's lots of things about the history of birthdays. Birthdays were not necessarily celebrated during my mother's time, are really not a big deal in my family. And I think that was an extension of slavery, and an extension of birthdays weren't celebrated that much until after we started marking time in specific ways after the Industrial Revolution. But my mother was the queen of birthdays. Like, she believed, like a lot of us do now, that we're gonna celebrate. Right. You're gonna know it's my birthday. So her birthday was February 14th. It was February 14th was her birthday, and I swear she started at Thanksgiving. My birthday's coming up. Christmas. My birthday's coming up soon. All the way up until the day she'd call. Wow. You know what today is?
Yeah, but we deserve to be celebrated. There's just so much that we have endured over time, and hey, we still endured some things today. So whenever there's an opportunity for us to, celebrate one another or be celebrated, I say, bring it on, bring it on. So
we've always found joy. We've always found joy as part of our resilience. So yeah, celebrating who you are and when you came into this world is a form of that.
Absolutely. Have a couple more comments. This is from our mutual friend, Wanda Lloyd. My grandmother had with her recipe for eggnog. I was too young to realize I should have written it down.
Oh.
Yeah, that's how I feel about my grandma with that chicken and dumplings. But I'm going to steal Crystal's recipe for that. Then also, my grandmother used to say, cook from the heart. She did not allow you to come in the kitchen if you were angry. She wanted good energy around the food.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the last person's food. If you see somebody stomping around in the kitchen because they got to prepare you a meal, that's the last bite of food you want. You don't want that food.
Right. That's true. And it said we always found joy and found time to love and celebrate. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you also talk about, I found interesting as well, about blackberries, and you have quite a few recipes in the book that include blackberries. So what is the connection to you, your family, and the blackberry?
Mm-hmm. Well, my first book was called Blackberries. And, the blackberries is a fruit that I grew up on and in the wild, right? We never had like domesticated blackberries. We had wild blackberries, and it was a communal event, but it was a family event where you had to really cover up. I don't know if any of the listeners, if any of the viewers have had to do this, but it's July in Kentucky. You're going blackberry picking, and in the heat of July, you have to put on long sleeves. Sometimes my grandparents would tape the sleeves together. That's to keep any of the little bugs called chiggers getting under your skin. They would also put like kerosene on you to try to stave off. So July, you got boots on to keep from stepping on a snake. You got long pants, long sleeves. But the joy is being out there. You also, like wild blackberries have stickers on them, have briars. So like reaching in, you might get stuck. But all this was like hard won. You had to fight for this fruit. Right. So we'd go out there and put with pails and buckets and pans, and that's all you would hear for hours. Just plunk, you'd hear those berries hitting the bottom of that. And then when we were allowed, we'd reach in and grab a few, eat a few. We probably ate ants and chiggers. Who knows what we were eating? But they were so good. And in my family, the best blackberries were on a graveyard. They were on where the family graveyard had been that went all the way back to slavery. And so while you were there was a lesson going on. So my grandfather would say, well, right here is where my little brother, Andrew, is buried. He was just 4 when we lost him.
Mm.
Up on the hill is where Pa Jim is buried, my daddy. And a lot of these graves would be unmarked. And so that's where I learned like the legacy of my family and all the names that were called. And that was the time that all the names were called. You had to watch for snakes because there would, those brambles, blackberry brambles were where like snakes would coil in there. So it was like a whole thing going on, like simultaneously. And then blackberries carried us all the way into the winter. So again, this idea of preservation. So we take all these pails and the buckets and containers of blackberries home, and Granny would wash them. She would can some, she would freeze some. We'd probably have blackberry cobbler that night. And then she would, it was cyclic. So it would be the dead of winter, and she would go down to the cellar to get one of those mason jars of blackberries that we had picked back in the summer. And she might make what I call blackberry soup, where she'd put it in the pan and cook it down. What's Joan said? Love picking blackberries, but we weren't as protected as you. Your people had you. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. And so then, in winter, we'd have that little taste, and you would have all those memories attached to it because it was one of the actual jars that you would help pick.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. So with that being said, how do you feel, growing up and having those types of experiences, and now you're like going to the grocery store, and getting places, getting some of your produce from places that aren't necessarily getting you that freshness, that ripeness. How do those things compare? I probably already know the answer. I do know the answer, but I just want to know what you have to say about
that. They don't compare. There's nothing like the blackberries that are domesticated are huge. Like they're really big, but they're not as flavorful as those little bitty ones that used to grow wild, that we used to forage for. Yeah. She said produce that isn't even from the US. Yeah, most of the blackberries come from Mexico. Like I couldn't even find any California blackberries. Most of them come from Mexico. And so they're different species of blackberries than the ones that are grown here. And everything just tastes different. Like there was no like the taste back then had a brilliance to it. Like, a blackberry would just like pop in your mouth. And like if you eat one now, you're eating a blackberry. Right. It's familiar, but it doesn't have that freshness and that pop. And we know that it's hard to find fresh produce. I mean, I think that's why farmers are so important. And I think there's a nice resurgence of Black farmers that's going on here in Kentucky. And I think it's going on across the country. When I've been on tour this past month, I've met so many farmers, particularly Black farmers, that are doing more farm to table dinners, that are, having CSA baskets where you can get fresh foods grown locally. And I think that's just wonderful that we have this kind of going back to nature movement going on.
Yes, absolutely. It is wonderful. And that's where I was kind of going with that question as well, because you have some family members that have a farm and all of that. And just, whenever we can go to a farmer's market or, whatever we can do to support those people who are trying to take us back to, the natural things that we used to eat, and not so much and stuff that's coming from other places, of course. Well, real quick, before we get into our last couple of questions, I want you all, I'm going to drop this here again. If you haven't left a comment already with Praisesong, in that you can either do it again or do it for the first time. For those of you who may have joined us a little later, there are copies of this book that are being given away. We've already done one, and I've got two more. One now and then one as we close. So if you drop Praisesong here in the comments, and then I am going to pull up another winner. So you all can do that. And it's Praisesong just as it is in the book. So let's see here and get ready to pull again. So yeah, get your entries in. All right. This will be real quick. All right, that's our first winner, and I'm going to draw again. Let's see. Rhonda, author Rhonda McKnight. So congratulations to you, Rhonda. Yes, and Rhonda, I've actually interviewed her before, so we have this information. Just reach out and we'll make sure that you get your copy of the book. So congratulations, Rhonda. Congratulations. All right. Now this book is powerful because of the stories that you tell about your family, about the wonderful and beautiful recipes, but then also the fact that because you are a poet, it's so well written. It's so I'm trying to think of the word to describe the way, just the way that you write, and the poetry in the book, and the fact that there are spaces in the book. Not only do you talk about how the women speak to you when you're in the kitchen and you're preparing these meals and all that sort of thing, but also that sometimes they just come to talk to you, period. And you have some instances in the book where your ancestors are speaking to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that two, there's lots of them incidents in the book, but two that were really important to the book was when when I discovered Grandma Aggie, and I was on a writing retreat in Florida, and I was supposed to be writing something else, but once I found her, it just haunted me down to the bone of like, here's this woman born in 1795, enslaved, brought to Kentucky. And I thought about her all night while I was going to sleep, and I finally went to sleep. And when I woke up, her voice came to me and said, my mother, who's in Virginia, calls to me. She's calling my name, but not in your language. And I was just crying, and I just, ran out of the cabin where I was staying and walked the beach and cried, and wasn't sure what to do with that, and didn't know that it would become this book. And then the idea of the kitchen ghost began with my grandmother. When my grandmother died in 94, I had, as my other family members had, the task. My grandmother had 7 children, 20, I think there was 25 grandchildren, and several great greats, and we would all gather for holidays.
Right.
And she had passed, and we were all in the midst of grief. And I was charged with doing the cooking for my little unit. We all decided to stay home. We didn't know how to celebrate, what this new celebration could possibly look like. So we all kind of stayed home in our own smaller units. And so I had my 3 children and my mother that I was cooking for. And I just didn't, even though I knew how to cook, I just didn't think I could do it. Like a big celebration, the way that Granny did it, I didn't think I could do it. I was breaking down. I was crying. And I remembered I had her dress in the closet. And I went and got her dress and brought it into the kitchen and hung it up on the back door. Yeah, that's her dress. And I hung it up on the back door, and I felt as if she entered the room with me, and that I had her encouragement. And she was saying, come on, you can do this. I taught you well. Let's go, and just kind of whispering to me like, dressing needs more sage. Don't put too much salt in this, and I just felt like that she was there sort of taking care of me. And I think that sort of ancestral spirit, the way that this book transfers from my people to everybody else is the fact that we all have kitchen ghosts.
Yes.
That's a question that I've asked people as I've gone across the country. Like, I've told you about my kitchen ghost. Who is your kitchen ghost? Who is someone that you remember in the kitchen preparing a meal that really meant something to you, and what was that meal? And so many people have responded. It's been writing the book was emotional. Having
Right.
it published has been emotional, and traveling with it has been emotional, because there's been some instances along the way where I'm sobbing. The people in the audience are sobbing because, when people raise their hands and they say who their kitchen ghosts are and why, just the memories, the flood of memories, and the sort of all the ancestral spirits that enter the room. We all have kitchen ghosts, people that meant something to us, that still do mean something to us, that loved us through the preparation of food.
Mm-hmm. And you all, please feel free to drop some of yours in the comments, as we're getting ready to wrap up. Because as you were saying that, I've already mentioned, my grandmother and the chicken and dumplings. But I think of my dad, because my dad is a person that, really cooked and loved to cook. And, he passed away actually this coming Sunday will be 6 years ago. And he loved to cook. I can remember, just a bunch of different things that he would make, or I can remember what really quick funny story. One year he had made like 2 turkeys for Thanksgiving, and one of them had this was really spicy, with pepper and stuff on it. And we were in the kitchen, and he was, getting ready to plate it, and it went flying.
Oh no.
And it was like, nobody saw that. The floor is clean. Take 5 seconds. 5-second rule. We did what we needed to do for that. But yes, he was always one who just loved to cook and try new things. Yes, yes. And yeah, my Aunt Fina, she was a grandmother to me. Yes, this is emotional. Yes, yes, it is. Just to think about that and those things that people made, those memories, and just the different dinners and stuff like that you've had over the years. And we didn't get into everything in the book, but Crystal touches on a lot of things like that: family dinners, things at the church, different types of celebrations. I was impressed by all the different ways you can make cornbread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never really thought about it, and like sorghum, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
Sorghum. And things like that. So I would really suggest that, if you weren't one of the ones who won tonight, and there's one more coming, please go and pick up a copy, because it will spur memory. You will be educated. You may shed a tear or two. You get some good recipes if you don't already have them, and all of that. So let me see. We have another Tashika. My grandmother was the best at baking her sweet potato pies. My dad was good at making potato salad. I lost them both, but they're with me in spirit.
Mm.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know you have, as you said, you've been having a lot of great conversations, Crystal, and you're continuing to travel, or almost done with the travel. Are there any particular things that you have upcoming that people can either watch virtually, or maybe come see you, or just anything else in the works that we can stay in touch and in tune with what you have going on?
Well, tomorrow I have a few online things, which if people follow me on social media, I will post there. But tomorrow I'll be in Cincinnati at Joseph Beth Bookseller at 7. And that is actually the last stop on this leg of the official tour. But I'll be doing readings and conversations and some writing workshops. I want to do writing workshops around getting people to write about their own kitchen ghosts too. And announcements will be made about those in the coming months.
All right, well, that sounds good, because, yeah, like some of these people in the room are thinking about it, and oftentimes there are people who don't catch it live but are able to catch it later. So I'm sure that the conversations will continue to go forth. And I'm going to make sure I write you when I fix those 2 things specifically. I told you about anything else in the book, but yeah, I can't wait to get those chicken and dumplings. So.
And post pictures. I love to see.
Yeah.
I have gotten so many pictures of people's biscuits, which I love to see people trying the recipes out.
Yeah, and you got those biscuits. They look really good. Those biscuits on the cover, really good. As does this cake back here.
Oh, yeah.
That looks good. Now, I know it's time to go, but just tell us a little bit about this cake.
That is a jam cake. And that cake has raisins and has pecans and blackberry jam and peach preserves and spices, cinnamons, cloves, and buttermilk in it. And it just turns into the most beautiful sort of dense cake. And what's been special about talking about that cake is how people in other cultures have something similar. You know, Jamaicans have like black cake, or there's a variety of fruit cakes that people make too. And that's one of our most prescient holiday desserts in my family is the jam cake.
And it looks good. When I was reading, I thought, sounds like fruitcake to me, kind of, sort of. So yeah, I love that. I love that. But yes,
it's
that's
better than fruitcake, though.
Better than fruitcake, yeah. Because my mama likes fruitcake. I do not like fruitcake, so maybe I like the jam cake. All right. So before we go, everybody, I'm going to drop this here one more time because this is your last opportunity to win a copy this evening in this forum. So yeah, you have to be here live to get it. So put Praise Song in the comments, or leave a comment with Praise Song, and I'm going to go ahead and draw the last winner for tonight. So I see a couple people dropping it. So yeah, so let's go. All right, let's see who the final winner will be. Wanda J. Silas. All right. So I will go ahead. Congratulations to all of the winners this evening. For those who have won that I don't already have your information, please shoot me an email at editor@browngirlcollective.com. That's editor@browngirlcollective.com, and I will get your address, and actually the publisher is going to send those books out directly to you. So congratulations to everyone who participated and was here for this wonderful conversation. So that is the end of our journey for this evening. So I'm just going to making sure I'm not missing any good comments here from the folks. 1 second. And so I thank you. I thank you, everyone. Yes, have some thank yous and congratulations. Thank you for the conversation. Congratulations, beautiful conversation, all those things. I agree with all of you, all of that. So this was wonderful, educational, inspiring, warm discussion. Yes, that's what we seek to do here. We're like two girlfriends. So ever come to Kentucky, you come to Atlanta, we got to get got to get together. So thank you to everyone for your time and for being here. Crystal, if you could hold on for me for 1 second, please don't hang up. I'm just going to announce next week's book, but I just want to say a proper goodbye to you here in just a moment. So I'll let you grab or whatever. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So yes, everyone, I thank you so much for your being here, for your participation and everything. It's always a pleasure to have people in the room who are engaged in the conversation and who love what we're talking about. So thank you. I know that Crystal appreciates it as well. And so if you are looking to purchase copies of Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost or any of the other books that you may see featured in this space, you can go to Brown Girl Collective bookstore.com. It is affiliated with Bookshop. So if you see Bookshop when it comes up, it still is going to say Brown Girl Collective Store, but that is a space to be able to support the different authors here and, hey, support my efforts as well. So thank you when you are able to do that, but feel free to pick it up at any independent bookstore, especially those Black-owned bookstores or any place where books are sold. So next week, when we come back together, we will be talking to actually a person who's been here. I want to say this is going to be her third time here. That's Vanessa Miller. Will be here to discuss her most recent book, The American Queen. So feel free to join us next week for a conversation with Vanessa Miller about the American Queen. So that's all I have for now, and I look forward to seeing everyone again real soon. And don't forget to pick up a copy of Crystal Wilkinson's book and reach out to her on social and let her know about all those wonderful stories and the wonderful results of your cooking some of her recipes. So thanks to everyone and have a great night. Take good care.